My guest today is a practicing psychotherapist, a teacher, and an author. He says that magic is the art of living joyfully awake and ferociously vital. And in this interview, we're going to talk about a specific type of magic that is focused on lasting transformation rather than instant returns, and how some of those concepts tie into his therapy practice. But real quick, I want to give a shout out to Michelle M., my newest supporter on Patreon. Thank you, Michelle. Patrons like you really help keep this channel going. All right, without further ado, allow me to introduce Anthony Rella. Welcome to Music, Myth, and Magic. I'm Eric Arcadian, and today I am speaking to author and psychotherapist Anthony Rella. Anthony, thank you so much for being on the show with me today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Well, I'm really excited to have you here, and to kind of just kick things off, could you tell me a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I I grew up Catholic, as many people did, and then I decided not to continue with that. But I grew up in a family, particularly my mom's side, that was very, I would say, kind of mystical Catholics who were very into Mary, and we were aware of Mary's appearances, and in that process of connecting with that, there was spirituality and religion was a big part of my life, and it felt very vivid to me, but I couldn't relate to the church. So I ended up connecting with people in college who were into paganism, and I thought that was really interesting and appealing, but also not for me. And then I left college and I realized, why not for me? So I went ahead and got involved in reclaiming witchcraft. There's a group in Chicago that was offering classes on tarot and things like that, and that was kind of my entry point. So I ended up being pretty involved with them, and ended up being kind of a leader with them for a few years, as well as a practitioner. And then I went on to study with T. Thorne Coyle, who was a reclaiming and a fairy witch, who offered a much deeper practice, much more structure that I was really craving. And that practice ended up becoming something that's now called Morningstar Mystery School, which started as a Anderson Fairy tradition and now is its own kind of separate thing. And so that's my pagan journey. And then I've been a therapist since 2013. I went back to graduate school during the Great Recession and came out, and I've been practicing ever since.
Very cool. So you've mentioned in that, brief history of your life, you've kind of mentioned a couple different traditions, and I'm curious if you could kind of expand on what those traditions are, and also like how they might affect your personal practice today, like what your personal practice would look like in a daily snapshot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the traditions I'm reclaiming and fairy and now Morningstar, they're actually it's really easy to talk about all those because they all flow from Anderson fairy tradition. And so it's usually referred to as fairy, sometimes spelled F-E-R-I, sometimes F-A-E-R-Y. And there's another kind of witchcraft path that's also called fairy witchcraft. So there's some confusion, but so it's different. People disambiguate it by talking about Anderson fairy, because that tradition started with this couple, the Andersons, Victor and Cora Anderson, who were a couple who lived, in the early 20th century to early 21st century, and they taught a pretty unique sort of spin on witchcraft that was informed by a lot of different threads in American magic and American witchcraft, but also kind of its own thing. It has its own kind of unique cosmology, and they were very influential to a number of practitioners and witches who have gone on to become very influential themselves. And so one of the people that learned from that tradition was Starhawk, And Starhawk's Coven, that started the reclaiming witchcraft tradition, I believe they were all kind of practicing fairy people, and then in their work together, they started to really want to bring magic into more active activism. They wanted to incorporate that into their activism, into their political work, and they were very influenced by anarchist approach and theory, and they kind of merged all that together into what's now called the reclaiming witchcraft tradition, which is a worldwide tradition now. It has a much broader reach than Anderson Fairy, which is very kind of like one-to-one. It's a very small group, a very small kind of passing along. It's a more intimate, whereas reclaiming is more about, they really want to build a lot of communities that interact with each other, and they're much looser, much more open. And then Morningstar is in some ways similarly, it's not reclaiming, but it's informed by reclaiming and by fairy, but it just kind of became its own sort of sub kind of tributary that kind of went off the main current and kind of became its own path. And so we're a relatively small school. We're still active, and we're just really about personally kind of bringing these practices into a deeper relationship with ourselves and how we relate to the world and each other, and trying to bring forth kind of your personal will and personal power.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for expanding a little bit on those. It's always fun to hear some different history of different traditions and practices. Now, all of this has kind of culminated for you in publishing a book, Slow Magic, right? And I'm curious, I mean, I did read the book, but what would you say, like, what is slow magic?
Slow magic is, I would say, an orientation towards magical practice that has two connotations. One is magic that you expect to happen slowly. So thinking kind of long term, really looking for a future that's kind of audacious, but not something you're going to expect to happen tomorrow or overnight, but just a goal that's really important to you or important to you as a collective that you're moving towards. And then also slowing down to slow down internally to kind of give ourselves, rather than jumping from A to Z, to really thinking about like what's right in front of me, what's the next step. So it's kind of like you're taking the map and you're looking at where you are now, and you're charting where you want to be, and just really following the process and being in relationship both to your own will, but also in relationship to the larger forces, human and otherwise, that we live and exist within, and having that relationship inform your journey towards that thing that you're trying to manifest.
It's funny because, I think it is contrary to what so many people out there are seeking, and they are seeking I want it right now. What is the magic that I can do to get me a job tomorrow, to find a lover tomorrow? And so how do you react to those people who obviously it would be a beneficial practice for, because it's a beneficial practice for all of us. But how do you kind of react to those people who are looking for things that are more the right now mentality?
So I would say that I totally get it, and that's a very understandable thing to want. And of course, I would want that myself. Everybody wants that. We want things quickly. We want ease and frictionless life. And if you can get all those things tomorrow, then that's really wonderful. And I hope you do. And there's no real problem with that. But for me, part of the reason I wrote this book is, after 20 years of practicing magic, and being one of those people, I'm an Aries sun, so I can be very impulsive. I can be very quick to move to action and just want to like get quick results, and then just kind of bang my horns into the wall over and over again. And I've had to learn that I need to slow down, because sometimes you just don't get those things, no matter how hard you keep hammering. And then the other times is sometimes when you do get those things quickly or overnight, they actually are kind of false results, or they're kind of traps. Sometimes, especially when we're moving out of desperation, when we're having this, I need a lover, I'm so lonely, or I need a job, like I'm so afraid of failing. That desperation can lead us to choose and receive things that are not actually good for us. They're not actually the things that are really aligned towards what we really want and towards our best good. And we're not necessarily exercising the most judgment over whether this is the right option for me, because there's just that urgency, like I need to do this. And so that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is that urgency can lead to ineffective action. So when I was back in the recession of 2008, I was in a desperate, I need a job. I was in a really difficult financial place. I just moved to a new city. I didn't have a job because all the jobs I told would be waiting for me were suddenly no longer there. And I was doing a lot of magic, a lot of urgent magic, and I just wasn't getting anything, especially at the wage that I was used to, because it just wasn't, the conditions weren't right. Like there was a recession happening. It was not personal to me. But me just kind of urgently like throwing more and more spells at it didn't actually change anything. So what I had to learn to do, and what I keep having to learn to do, is to slow down, and get really clear both about what is it that I'm actually wanting? What is it that I'm trying to move toward? Do I really want that? Because sometimes I don't really want that. I just think I need to have it. And then also to get clear about the conditions in which I'm working. What's happening around me, and how do I adjust my approach based on these conditions? Because something that might work in one season is not going to work in this season. And so I need to take a different approach. So that is what I'd say to those people, is just, it's not about dismissing that urgency. It's just about trying to ground that urgency into deliberate, effective action.
I really, really love some of the things that you're saying here. There is a lot to the answer you just gave. And what I'm hearing incorporated into that answer are many of the themes that you actually talk about throughout the book. So one thing that kind of stuck out to me, though, is you were talking about trying to get that instantaneous result. And as you get that instant result, you realize it was not the thing that you wanted. And I always think that is such a fascinating cycle that we go through. I have heard the cycle of wanting is explained sometimes as not having the thing we want, thinking we know what we want, getting the thing that we want, and then realizing that the thing was not what we really wanted. And then it just goes over and over and over. And it's one of those cycles. And cycles is something that you talk about in the book. But for right now, I'm hearing echoes of some of the themes that you talk about early on, like kind of the difference between desire and longing and will. And those are three very similar words that I had never before hoped to differentiate between those three things.
Mm-hmm.
But you do a very good job at that. Could you touch on that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. And I'll try to, in the book, I talk about how I came to start differentiating. I myself did not differentiate those words originally, but I was doing a divination working with a god who kind of stopped me and kind of told me that I had to choose between these three paths of desire, longing, and will. And I asked the god, I was like, well, aren't those the same thing? And the god said, no, you have to choose one. So I did choose one. Then later I reflected, how are they not the same thing? And so I include that in the beginning of the book as what I came to in that process. And so they all do have similar roots. They're all rooted in that sense of absence and that's emotionally charged. That's kind of well, there's something that's not in my life that I'm wanting or that I'm missing or I'm yearning for in some capacity. Desire is kind of that basic, that charged emptiness, that charged, I want this thing. There's some experience I want to have, some kind of, thing I want to acquire or person I want to be or person I want to be with, or I just want to know what it's like to have this kind of experience. And so that calls me to move towards that in a way, that can be very tricky because sometimes, as you were saying, sometimes the actual desire, I'm going to air quotes, actual desire is not what I think the desire is. I think when I think of a desire, I might be thinking of a strategy to meet a deeper desire, but I haven't yet identified the deeper desire. So it might be something like to be loved, to be really loved authentically as who I am. But superficially, I think my desire is for that hot person to go out on a date with me. And so the path of desire is about, first trying to ask that person out, see if they'll date you. But ultimately, that's just the strategy that helps you eventually start to move into the deeper desire, the deeper yearning, and to separate out, okay, it's actually not about this specific person. That specific person actually couldn't meet this deeper need. So that's desire. Will is the capacity to do. Will is to the capacity to say, I'm going to do something and then do it. So I'm going to ask that person out. I walk over, I say, hey, do you want to go have coffee with me? I guess people don't do that. You text them, you message them on the apps, whatever. But basically it's I want to do this, right? I'm going to do this. And then I take the step towards doing it. So it can be that simple, and it can be related to desire, but also will can be separate from desire. Sometimes we use will to do things that we're supposed to do or that we think we should do, or that we're doing on somebody else's behalf. And so that can become kind of separate from desire and sometimes in conflict. But if they can work together, they can work together very well. And then longing is more, I think of the mystical path. Longing is I had the thing and now it's gone and I miss it and I'm just yearning for that reconnection. Or just, I just have this feeling, I know what that is, but I'm not getting it. And so longing, etymologically, the word longing, like lengthening, you become longer in the process of longing. It stretches you out. It expands you because you're reaching for something that you're not quite getting. And so there's something about that really being present with the emptiness or the yearning and not filling it, that actually kind of grows us in a really interesting way. Or just being with that experience of having and then losing and then yearning. I think what differentiates it from desire is really about trying to bring towards you and possess, and longing is about kind of like reaching out and not quite ever having and never possessing. And so those are just really different kind of interesting flavors to explore.
Yeah, those are definitely some interesting perspectives on some otherwise very similar words that you do elucidate on for an entire chapter, which is pretty cool. That people can kind of dive more into those words and some related exercises and stuff like that. Now, something else I really appreciated is right like on page 1, you give a definition of magic. And I love reading other people's definitions for magic because it is just such a huge territory of things, right? And your definition is very simple and straightforward, and I appreciate it. And it is: magic is the art of living joyfully awake and ferociously vital. And I'm just wondering how you arrived there.
I love that question. I'm just sitting with that for a moment. You know, the people who I've most been drawn to as magical teachers, I was drawn to because they felt more alive than other people. And when I saw them, there was just something about their presence and their energy where they just seemed more alive. They seemed more in this world. They had more presence, sometimes more charisma, but just like a beingness that just felt like there's someone here. Whereas, and they're not, nobody's like that 100% of the time. And I've gotten to know many of them, and they're just humans like everybody else. But, and in the process of doing magic, I think it brings that vitality more into us and more into our relationships with the world. So instead of just kind of seeing the world or life as something that's just happening to you, that you're just enduring or just kind of floating along with, magic, especially Western magic, really has this component of will that I think is fairly unique among many traditions, where it reminds us that we're participating in this world, that life isn't just happening to us, but you are here, you have a spark of the divine in you, you're here to participate in the unfolding of the world. And so there's a reason for you to be here. It's not about just kind of hanging out, doing your time until you can leave and go to a better place, or just being in your suffering and just meditating on how miserable this world is. Although certainly there is suffering, and that is a part of life. It's about being really vital and alive while in it, and inspiring other people to also bring their own vitality. And that's something that's really become more clear to me. I started doing martial arts practice a few years ago, and that and some other ritual experiences really showed me how much when we bring vitality in and aliveness in, it actually inspires other people to meet us in that it brings out their aliveness and vitality. And all of a sudden, something that might have been kind of just a kind of an everyday kind of just going through the motions, just, okay, we're doing this, suddenly becomes kind of alive and vital and invigorating. And so to me, that's a lot of what the spark of magic brings into life.
Wow, that's really interesting. I think the concept of having that thing that you see in someone else that you want to be taught, like that you're seeing that person and you're thinking, you see the spark in them, and you're hoping that they can kind of, through whatever spiritual practice that they're teaching you, kind of give you a piece of that spark. And then hopefully in turn, one day you can be that person for someone else. And, this is kind of the mentor, mentee, the apprenticeship dynamic going down and passing things down through time. So that's very interesting. Another concept that I really appreciated in your book is the different ways that you talk about time. And I think that, like, most people are pretty good with imagining time as a line, and we might even be pretty good with imagining time cyclically, which you have another chapter on, because we understand like seasonal things and planting, and that's been ingrained into us for like thousands of years. But you also have the third view of time, which is time as a spiral. And I'm wondering if you would take a moment to kind of explain those three, but really kind of focus on what the spiral time is like.
Yeah, so I work a lot in the book with something that in my school tradition we call the divine twins, and they're kind of divine opposites. They embody all the contradictions and oppositions we experience in life. And one of the ways working with them kind of brings out the synthesizing sort of third principle. And how I've started to think about it is like those old school 3D glasses where you have one red filter and one blue filter, and you look at something and that is designed for those glasses, and you have depth because you're seeing through two different perspectives, but being able to see through them simultaneously gives you this depth, this dimensionality, this three-dimensionality. And so with these particular twins of time, we have linear time, which is how most of us experience life. It's narrative time. There's a beginning, a middle, and the end. We're moving towards something or away from something. There's a stopping point, and we're just kind of in a continuous forward motion. And then there's cyclical time, as you were saying, which is kind of the cycles of seasons, the cycles of the day, just this endless sort of recurrence that we're living through that can be taken even esoterically when people believe that we live through multiple cyclical lives, that we just keep experiencing human life over and over and over again, and that there's no escape from that. Both of these have insights when you look at life through these lenses. Either you just have this one line of life and it ends, and then you move on to something else, or you don't. Or the cyclical life where it's just you never escape. You're just kind of repeating these things over and over again. And to look at life through both of these reveals some interesting things and some opportunities to work magically. I also think of cyclical time as kind of helping us to think about the conditions that we're in. As I was talking about earlier, like this season is not the right time for this kind of magic, but it's going to change seasons pretty soon if I just wait. And so then I can do that magic then. But then when you look through both perspectives, both linear and cyclical, then you see the spiral. And the spiral is actually how we move through space. Our sun is moving in its own orbit around the galactic center, and all the planets are kind of spiraling behind it. And they're just doing this thing. They're not doing the down. They're just doing this. And so basically it's the both and. It's that there is a forward movement, and there's recurrence, and there's cyclicity. And so most of us kind of know this intuitively or experience this, although I think when you're just starting to work on yourself or try to make something happen, this is very frustrating. And we kind of have to be reminded of this, that when you're trying to make a change, it's normal to experience patterns or times of success, and then times you feel like you're losing ground, like you like, didn't I already deal with this? Or, I was making so much good progress on this thing, and all of a sudden I'm back to where I was 3 months ago, or it feels like I was. My mood was great, and all of a sudden my mood's really, really bad again. And so it's normal to have progress and setbacks. It's normal to have cyclicity in your life, to have seasons. But also when you're looking at the linear thing, you can also see, this moment is different than it was 5 years ago. I know for myself, whenever it's kind of Aries season, I tend to feel more anxious. And I think there's a lot about Aries and anxiousness that I think is kind of baked in, but also there's something about spring and that quality of I just want to do something, something about the allergies that kind of activates it. And so when I first realized this years ago, it was this, okay. So this is just something I'm going to deal with every year. But now I can look back and I can say, I'm actually so much better at dealing with it now than I was 5 years ago. And part of what made it easier was realizing like, this is something I'm going to pass through no matter what. But that doesn't mean I have to just re-experience it the same way every time. I can enter this new phase of this cycle with new tools, with new perspectives, with everything I've learned up till now. And I can move in with will and with intention. And like, I'm going to try something different this cycle and develop some new information and new skills. So it's that both and, that I can be moving forward while also being compassionate about recurrence and setbacks.
That's really interesting. And as you're describing that, it made me think of this. It made me think of a pendulum, right? Swinging back and forth from one extreme to the other. Mm-hmm. And there is sometimes a meditation that I'll do with myself. If you think of like the pendulum swinging from a negative situation to a positive situation. And, this is something that happens time and time again with life.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of being caught by the swing and being in that situation, I visualize myself rising above the pendulum and being free from the pendulum swing. And it's kind of interesting, for whatever reason, your description of like spiraling around from good to bad. You're talking about allergy season, like some days you have bad allergies, some days you don't have such bad allergies, but linearly through that cycle you have learned lessons and you have discovered ways to do things better related to the allergy season. So it's really just I love thinking about time in all sorts of different ways, and I can't say that I have really visualized the spiral very much before, so I definitely appreciated that. And something that I did notice a lot in a lot of the exercises that you talk about, like especially with things like summoning the council, I believe, and stuff like that. It seems very similar to what I might call shadow work. Would you call a lot of this shadow work?
I think there's definitely overlaps. There's definitely overlaps where it's about just being open to every part of myself, and including parts that we might call shadow parts that I don't necessarily identify with or see in myself. Personally, I used to work more explicitly with the idea of shadow work, and now it's just kind of become all different parts to me. So I don't think of it that much in that way anymore. But that's not because it's like wrong or I disagree with it. It's just kind of become a just not as much of something a way. Like it's hard for me to think about like what parts are in shadow. Because they all have their own sort of world and beingness. So, but I do think there is overlap to that.
Okay, definitely understandable. I'm also curious how much of this type of stuff do you employ with your patients in your therapy practice?
Well, I use I use internal family systems, which is a form of therapy that informs some of the book. I talk a little bit about it, and that's the parts approach. And in part, I think that's where, there's a similarity with like Jungian psychotherapy in which you're looking at the unconscious. You're really trying to get beneath the surface story. And so you're looking at kind of shadowy material, but IFS holds that, we all have just multiple parts of us and they all have different agendas and different goals. And we can kind of find ourselves identified with different parts and not even realize that we changed. First I was in this part that had this sort of feeling and all of a sudden I'm in this different one and I didn't notice it at first. So from the outside, people can say like, you're saying the opposite thing than you said 5 minutes ago. But it happened so quick that I might not have caught myself. And so, I'm getting a little bit off your question. Sorry, I'm coming back. So I do that with my clients. The goal is to slow down, to recognize your parts and to make space for your larger self. And that is something that I think overlaps both approaches. Magically, that was how I was trained too, is to notice your parts, to befriend your parts, to not be at war with your different parts, but to just really honor how all of them are trying their best to serve us and serve our highest good, serve our higher self. And so I love IFS for that. It's very compatible. And so I get to bring that to clients, but in a way that's more open to, they don't have to be spiritual or religious. They could be of a completely different religious tradition than I am. We might never, ever talk about spirituality or religion, but it really gives them a framework to work with that stuff. And so the idea of multiplicity and that each of these parts is a part of us, and there's not one that's who you really are and the others are just kind of wrong or misguided, that I definitely bring into session with clients. There are some folks I have worked with who are open to, I keep, a tarot deck in my office, and just sort of, it's just there. And sometimes people ask about it. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they ask and I tell them what it is, and then we never talk about it again. Some people want to pull out a card every session. So that's just an opportunity. And I think it's always a rich thing, but it's not something I try to just sort of let these be options that are available, that people can choose or not, but it's, I'm not going to steer them towards it. But I think their worldview is compatible, but I don't necessarily bring a lot of the explicitly magical stuff into the therapy room, because I think they're just different disciplines that work with the same material. And I just, for myself, try to be clear about, okay, which hat am I wearing today? What's my focus today?
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. The lens through which you are viewing a particular problem at the moment. It's always cool to learn about somebody's background and history and what their interests are, because you can see that oftentimes reflected in how they talk about something or how they explain something or their teaching style, right? So like a lot of times when I try to reach out and grab a metaphor to explain something, I might use a musical metaphor because like I play a lot of music. I'm a musician. And reading your writing, Tony, like you can definitely tell that you have a passion for therapy, because a lot of the ways that you approach these magical concepts are, it's almost like a very scientific explanation for esoteric topics. And I love that. I love when we can bring science down and merge it with the intangible and make this lovely world that sits somewhere in between the two. How do you think you have arrived at kind of that sort of perspective on things?
Yeah, I love that noticing. And immediately I recognize what you're talking about. And it's a lot because I've worked, it does come from my therapy practice, and that I've worked with people. Actually, it comes from two places, because I have to give Thorne credit too. When I studied with Thorne originally, I felt like were very, they gave a lot of kind of clear practices and things to follow. And they didn't necessarily tell us what you're supposed to believe or what you should do, but just when you notice this, try doing this, and here's a specific sort of protocol to just try. And when I go into therapy, I work with all kinds of people, or I have worked with all kinds of people from all different places. And, there can be people who are very self-aware, psychologically sophisticated, who have a lot of experience or self-knowledge, who are very, can just go with the esoteric concepts really fluidly. And then there are people who just don't get any of it. They just don't even, they start from this place of, I just want to feel better. Why do I have to talk about my childhood? Feelings are gross. I don't know why, why should I even bother with my feelings if I don't have to deal with them? And I've practiced over the years, both just really honoring, again, all these things. I get it. Feelings are gross sometimes, but trying to really give clear, understandable, accessible explanations, and not just getting, I love that so many people are informed about neurobiology and the brain and stuff like that, but But when I first started working in therapy, it just seemed like that was too esoteric. Sometimes people like to hear about the brain stuff because it made them feel like, okay, there's science here. But even that, well, what do I do with that when I'm having a panic attack? And so I've just learned over the years how to really try to break it down into simple concepts that are accessible and not watering down, but also to really operationalize what I'm asking you to do. And so sometimes it can be vague, like just feel your feelings. But sometimes people are like, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know how to feel my feelings. I don't feel anything. And so I've just tried to learn, like, okay, just do you feel your right pinky? Like, can you notice what's like in your right pinky? And they're like, oh yeah, I mean, okay. I'm like, okay, so before I asked you to do that, your right pinky was there feeling things the whole time, but you weren't aware of it in the way that you are right now because we're choosing to bring awareness into it. Okay. Like, so that's what I'm asking you to do with your feelings. Like, there's something happening in your body related to this feeling. And I just want to see if you can notice what's happening in your body. So anyway, just trying to really be clear. And so when I write about magical stuff, a lot of that comes into how I write about magical stuff too. And I enjoy it. I think it's cool. I think what I've learned in the past few years is I think I'm trying to relax that a little bit because part of what's cool about magic is it's mysterious, and you can kind of wrestle with these kind of vague things for a while and get really rich insight out of. So not everything has to be operationalized and turned into a recipe cookbook, but ideally the best recipes aren't about simplifying and turning things into a machine. It's about creating something really accessible that you can do that opens you up to the mystery. So it's like having like a really firm rope you can hold on to while you're rappelling into this mysterious world. So that's what I hope to achieve.
I really appreciate that answer. There are so many interesting overlaps between those two perspectives, and I could probably just ask you questions about it all day. But I am curious because we hear a lot that tarot is a tool for psychology these days. And I was just wondering if you could share like a practical example or exercise that you might do with a client using a tarot deck.
Yeah, I mean, what I do often when a client would like to look at the tarot is I have them, I do it a little bit more. I do think there's a psychologically informed way of looking at it, and then there's a esoterically divine informed divination, and they can be compatible. But so I'll ask them to draw a card and just kind of look at it and tell me about it, and tell me like what they see and what story they're telling about the card and how it makes them feel. And often it's interesting, sometimes they want to know what the meaning is, and we'll get there. But often just in them doing that, they kind of get the meaning without knowing they're getting the meaning. They just, kind of connect to it, or they see really interesting things in the card that I never noticed before, which I'm always secretly very excited about. But, and so they'll describe it, and usually like telling the story is particularly what I'm trying to get to, because the story illuminates some kind of theme that's happening. And this is drawing from the Rorschach tradition of psychology, where they hold up the ink blot and you describe what you think is happening, what you see in the ink blot. And it's not about getting it right or wrong, because there is no right or wrong. It's that the story you're telling illuminates something that's happening in your psyche, because it's all coming from you. And so if you look at, the Queen of Swords and you're like, wow, I mean, she just seems really like mean and intimidating, and I feel like kind of afraid of her, then it's like, okay, is there someone in your life that you have that experience with, like like a person who you feel intimidated by or afraid of, or is there something in yourself that you're feeling that about? And so that becomes sort of the entry point into looking at what themes are coming up for you, or how that person represents a facet of yourself or an aspect of yourself that may be in shadow. So it's an invitation to develop it. Maybe you're afraid of it because it is a part that is not so much, you identify as more of a friendly people pleaser part, and the Queen of Swords is very, very sharp, very clear, very precise. And so it feels scary. But if you could befriend that part of you, it could bring a lot of relief, that you could cut through a lot of noise that you've been trying to avoid with people pleasing, and just kind of get to the point.
Wow, that's such a powerful exercise for personal reflection or emotional awareness, just for ourselves. So I think that's really great. Now, Tony, in just a minute, I am going to ask you the signature question. But before we get there, I want to open it up for you to let people know where you will be, if there's any place people can find you, either online or in person, how people can get in contact with you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so probably the best way to find out what's going on, I have a website, anthonyrella.com. It's just my first and last name all together. And that's where, it's mostly oriented towards my therapy practice, but I have a part about writing, and I also have a section at the top with all my social media stuff. So that's a way. I started doing a Substack and for blog and newsletter purposes, and then also an Instagram. And so it's really the Substack and the Instagram if you want updates about upcoming events or things that I'm doing. I've been trying to do on Monday evenings. I do kind of a slow magic Mondays where I read a little bit from the book and talk. It's an Instagram live. And so if people come and want to participate, I'll interact with them. Otherwise, I just kind of talk a little bit. And so any other upcoming events I have, I would put on my Substack as just an announcement, or on the Instagram. So those are good ways to keep in touch with me. And I'm just always kind of looking for opportunities to give workshops or to speak at bookstores. And so that's something I don't have anything I can announce right this moment, but if you follow the Instagram or the Substack, you'd find out.
Okay, excellent. So what I'm going to do for anybody listening, I will have collected all of those links. I will put them in the video description below. And alongside those links to find Anthony, you will also find a link to his book, Slow Magic. So if you're looking for anything like that, all you'll have to do is go below and click, and you will get right to where you're trying to go. So, Tony, it is time for the signature question. So how do you use sound or music in your personal magical practice?
Well, my favorite way of using music is I create a lot of playlists, and it started when I was young, and we still made mixtapes, and then we made mixed CDs, and now they're Spotify playlists. But whenever particularly if there's an energy I'm trying to embody, or I'm working with a deity or a planet or, something like that, trying to invoke some sort of energy or quality into my being, then I love making a playlist of just songs that to me evoke that quality or speak from that quality, or kind of, like if I want to work with Mars energy, I'll make a Mars playlist and just bring in things that really speak to me about that Mars energy, and then listen to it over and over again to really bring that in and embody that. So that's really my favorite way of working with music.
Very cool. Okay, so this is going to be a very subjective question for everyone. However, I'm too curious. I have to know, when you make a playlist for planetary energy, how do you curate those songs? Is it more about something lyrically? Is it about the melody, like if it's a happy or a sad melody? Is it about the rhythm, or how fast or slow? Like, what things to you stick out as defining that quality of energy?
I think, I'm a big lyrics person, so lyrics is usually where I gravitate to first, but also certainly the quality of the music itself. Sometimes there will be songs that just feel in line with that, and so that's not so much the rhythm, but I'm certainly, I would say lyrics first, then sound itself second. Mhm.
It's always so interesting to hear someone else's perspective on that question, because like for me, I'm almost complete opposite of you in the regard that like for me, I have to say like most of the time lyrics come last in for how I perceive the feel of a particular song. So it's always fun to hear different people's perspectives on that. But Tony, I have really appreciated you taking the time to come on the show and talk with me and talk about your book and answer all of these questions. So I know you have other things scheduled today, so I will go ahead and end our call here, but I just wanted to say thank you, and I appreciate you being here. So thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Bye. That was a great interview, and another big M3 thank you to Tony for taking the time to be with me on the show today. You know the drill, guys. If you haven't already checked out his book, Slow Magic, be sure to grab a copy. I will put a link to that in the video description below. Please be sure to like and subscribe here on YouTube. If you enjoyed this particular video, then maybe even leave a comment so I know you're listening. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, or other social media at Eric Arcadian. But if you really want to help support me making more content in the future, please check out my Patreon page. Patrons get a lot of cool perks. On top of being able to watch these interviews before anyone else, they can also download my music, get a free rune reading, they can get discounts to my upcoming classes, and more. Heck, you might even get a shout out in one of my videos like this. Wait, which side is it on? Like this. Like this. Remember, there's always a way to make music. Until next time.